What's up everyone, and welcome to another episode of Kelvin's Garage. Today we have a very special episode. We are going to change out the front brake pads of the 2006 Honda Civic. Front brake pads. So if lately you've been experiencing a lack of braking power, or maybe the pedal feels a little mushy, a little bit weak, and the car is not really quite stopping when you need it to, and you really need to hold tight on those brakes, or if the brakes are squealing, squealing and making funny noises, it might be time for you to replace those front brake pads. Alright, let's take a look at what we need to do our front brake pad replacement job. Alright, first of all, we need the brake parts cleaner, okay? My favorite Walmart brand, SuperTech, only $3 a bottle. Alright, we also need a brake piston compressor, okay? And that's what this is, okay? This special little tool. It's not too expensive, probably a couple bucks, and you can get it at any auto parts store, Amazon, Harbor Freight, alright? But this is used to compress the front brake piston so that we have room to install our new, brand new thick brake pads, okay? And we also need some lube, okay? We need some kind of brake lube, alright? Now, the box that I bought here, the Akebono, this already comes with some brake lube. Alright, but I like to use it in abundance, and I don't like to have to use it sparingly and worry about running out, so I buy my own tube of brake lube, okay? And this is Versa Chem, okay? Brake Quiet Synthetic Brake Grease, alright? It's hard to see here, but I'll link it down below, alright? And finally, we need the brake pads. Okay, so the brake pads that I bought for this job are the Akebono, okay, ASP 465D, okay. Now these are the highest quality Akebono brake pads that you can buy. There is more than one set, okay. Akebono offers more than one offering. Now in the previous brake job that I did, the brake pad job that I did, I used the ACT 465A. Okay, and those are also very good brake pads, but now I'm upgrading, okay? So these are the high performance ones. These are ASP 465D, okay? And you can get it at Rock Auto, you can get it at Amazon. Okay, and let's take a look at what we've got here, alright? So, the thing about this kit that's special is that it comes with the shims. So if you take a look here, these are the brake shims that are supposed to be installed on the caliper, okay? And where the brake pads will go. Alright, so hold on to the shim kit, we're gonna use it in a bit. Okay, and here are the brake pads. Look at that, okay? Look at these beautiful brake pads. Look at all that meat on there. Okay, you can see it. Brand new. Okay, already has the brake shim on top of here. The anti-squeal shim, as it's sometimes called. Alright, and we can take a look here. Very hefty, very beefy ceramic brakes, okay? There's a little instruction manual, as you can see here. Akebono, but we don't need that, okay? We have YouTube, right? We have YouTube and we have Kelvin's Garage. And like I said earlier, there's this little cheap envelope of Moly brake lube, which looks like it's actually been punctured during the shipping. Okay, so we can't use that, and that's why we have our own little bottle of brake lube. Okay, so I unwrapped the brake pad so you can take a very close look at it, and you can see how high quality these brake pads are. I really like them because they can last for maybe about like 3 years or so. Okay, so very long lasting. They don't make a lot of noise. Alright, if you take a look here, you can see the little metal flakes in the brake pad, okay? Here it looks like they're like copper or bronze, okay? And then there's also these little shims here that tell you that when the brake pad is worn out, it'll start squealing, okay? I think most brake pads have this, but this has it too, obviously. Alright, so when the brake pad thickness goes lower and lower, eventually it'll start hitting this metal, the rotor, and then it'll give you that audible signal that says, hey, change me out, okay? Change me out. Alright, and it has these very nice brake shims, okay? And of course, you know, they're a front brake pad set, so there's 2 per disc, okay, for the left and the right. Alright, 2 per disc. Alright, and we're going to take out the old ones and pop in these new ones. Okay, after you've jacked up the car and taken off the wheel, we can take a good look at the brake system here, okay? We take a look at the brake disc, okay, and the brake caliper. Now, it's a good idea to let the brake system cool down. So before you do any of this, let the car sit for a little bit. That way, things are not hot to the touch, and we can work on it a little bit easier, alright? But we can see here that here's the brake disc, okay, nice and shiny and worn for all these years of driving, right? and here's the brake caliper. All right, and what we're going to do is we're going to flip this brake caliper up and take out those brake pads. You see those brake pads? So first what we're going to do is we're going to clean this off with some brake cleaner, and do this periodically while you're doing the brake job. That way things are nice and clean and you can inspect them very well. So just spray the brake cleaner all over and do it as needed as we start unlocking some of these components. Now if you take a good look at this brake disc rotor, okay, you can see here that it's got this little lip on it, okay? That means it's been worn over time, and this is understandably so, all right? But make sure you don't put any grease on the disc, okay? If your hands are dirty, spray it again with the brake cleaner, okay? The brake cleaner leaves no residue, okay? And it's for removing dust and grease. But you can see here that these are vented disc brakes, okay? From the top here, you see those slots, okay? And there's two sides to them, okay? So that's the brake disc. And just feel around for the lip, you know. You probably won't want to replace these, okay? They probably don't need to be replaced, all right? So we're just going to change the pads out. But in a full high-performance brake job, you would actually replace the brake rotors as well, okay? But we're not doing that here. We're only focusing on the brake pad. Another thing you can do even before taking any of the calipers off, okay, or flipping the caliper up, is you can take a look at this window here, okay? It might be hard to see from my camera angle here, but this little window here has been cut out, so you can take a look at the brake pad thickness without having to remove anything at all. Okay, you can see here that see this little window, if you look very carefully, how much meat is left on the brake pad. And even though it seems like we're okay, we're still going to replace them anyway, just for you guys. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove this bolt right here, okay? And that will allow us to flip the caliper up. All right, and this bolt is called the flange bolt. There is this thing here that's called a caliper pin, all right? And so when we undo this bolt here, this thing might spin around. And we'll just simply need to hold this with another wrench, okay? So this is a 12mm bolt, okay? And then this is 19mm to hold the caliper pin. We got our mallet, and we're gonna knock this wrench. We're gonna knock this bolt loose with our 12mm wrench. Okay, and it's loose, okay? So that's it. We didn't need to hold the caliper pin, but when we tighten it later, when we torque this down, we're going to have to do that. Okay, so remove the 12mm bolt. Okay, you see that? Okay, now that we have removed the flange bolt, okay, it's going to be easy now to flip this caliper up. If you need to, you can use a screwdriver like this and kind of just wedge it in there and just flip it up, just like so. You see that? Okay, it broke loose. It broke loose, and I'm going to flip this up. Okay, so just flip this up. Flip it up and just let things happen. Like so. Okay, so we've opened up the caliper, and we can see here that the brake pads, they still have some meat on them, all right? They're still decent, all right? But we're still gonna change them out, and we're gonna try out our new performance Akebono brake pads. Again, these are also Akebono brake pads, but these are the slightly more standard version, okay? The ones that we're putting in are the premium version. Okay, but you can see here, you know, here's the caliper pin in its full glory. Okay, we see this also spins around a little bit. If you take another close look here, these are where the shims are. Okay, you see the shim here, and you see the shim up here. Okay, and this is what we call the caliper piston, all right? You see the piston here? It's actually hollow in the middle, okay? But you can see that there's this metal rim, okay? And this metal rim is what will put pressure on the inner brake pad, okay? The inner brake pad right here, okay? And these two, this fork right here, basically, these two points are what's going to be putting pressure on the outer brake pad. So keep that in mind, all right? And we're gonna give this another little spray down before we continue work here. So grab your brake cleaner and give it a little spray. Look at all that good stuff here. And if you can, try to get the inside too, okay? Try to get the inside. So let's see here. There we go. Got it. Okay, at this point we can just take off our brake pads and see what we got. Okay, so just take your fingers, just pry them off, okay? See, they come out pretty easy. See that? And again, be careful not to touch the rotor. We don't want to add any additional dirt or grease to it. Okay, so but just take out the brake pad. Okay, there goes one, the inner or the outer one. Okay, and then we've got the inner one over here. All right, and be careful, there's some dust. Okay, we don't want to inhale that stuff, but supposedly it's non-toxic these days, but still be careful. Okay, and we're going to take off the little shim down here. All right, just pry it off. Okay, use some force here, and if you need to use a screwdriver, you can do that too. Okay, but just like so, take off the lower shim. Okay, there that is. Okay, and then we have the upper shim over here. Okay, we can take this off as well, same methodology. All right, and that's it. Give it another good spray while you're at it. Okay, we want to be fairly clean before we install the new pads and the new shims. So I opened up the shim kit that came with the Akebono brake pads, okay? And it looks like it has a lot of shims in there, okay? Way more than we need, okay? So we're only gonna need 2 for each side, all right? So we need 2 here, okay? Another 2 here, okay? And I think this kit was made for, to cover the SI also, okay? Which is why there's the extra set of 4 for the rears, okay? But since we only have an LX, we won't need these. We'll only need 2 for the driver's side, 2 for the passenger side. All right, here are the brake pads side by side, all right? The old set here on top, and here the new set here on bottom. And just lay out the parts here so we can see that they are pretty much identical in shape, all right? And the only difference being that one's old, one's new, okay? So the shims, okay, are direct replacements for the original shims, okay? And the brake pads are direct replacement for the older brake pads. And the only difference I can see here is the color of the metal flaking in the old versus the new. That's probably because of the difference in the model. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to prepare the brake pads and shims for installation. Okay, so the purpose of the caliper grease, okay, the brake pad and caliper grease, is actually to provide a little bit of cushion between all the vibrating and moving brake parts against the caliper, okay? So what can happen is that when you apply the brakes, you know, some of these components start vibrating along a little bit, and you might hear some squealing, some weird noises, some rattling, okay? So what the synthetic caliper grease, okay, and brake quiet, it actually says brake quiet on there, is to provide a little cushion so that doesn't happen. Now, if we used the grease that came with the box, okay, that's not really a lot, right? So you'd have to use that sparingly. But since we have our tube of brake quiet, we can actually provide a lot more extra coating around the brake components, and that's what we're going to do now, okay? I'm going to essentially put some of the brake grease on all the critical areas, okay, of the shims and of the pads, okay, so that there's an extra cushion of material which will prevent the components from potentially vibrating down the road, okay? So these brake pads last for like 3 years or even more, so you want to make sure that they don't give you any headaches down the road. So as I said, since we have the leisure and the abundance of having brake grease, what I like to do is I like to take off the shim, okay, which is already on the brake pad. So you can just pry that off just like so, okay? Pry it off, okay, just like so. And you can even take a look here and pry this one off here as well. All right, and then just with your finger, apply some brake grease. So apply some brake grease here, and just spread it with your finger, okay, along the shim, all right? And that way there is a little bit of coating of that against the pad. All right, just like so, okay? Now for the brake pads, it's okay to, you know, be a little sloppy about it. Okay, so basically we've coated this one pretty well. So we can put this back on here. Okay, on the inside, and also do it on the inside of this one as well. Okay, coat the shim. All right, but one thing you want to make sure is you be careful putting any kind of grease on the surface of the pad, okay? So we don't want to do that, right? So just be careful when the time comes. Make sure that no grease is touching the surface of the pad, the opposite side of this pad here. All right, now for the shim, right, what we're gonna do is we're gonna put some on the back side of here, all right? Back side of here, back side of here. okay, and then a little bit on top here, okay, where the pad will make its contact. Okay, you see these contact points here? That is going to sit right here and right here. Okay, and then we can just kind of spread it with our finger. You can use a Q-tip if you don't want to use your finger. Okay, either way works. Okay, but I just like to put a little bit of coat of the grease, a little bit of everywhere. All right, now it's okay to, it's better to do it outside, okay, rather than doing it closer to the brake rotor, because we don't want to get the grease on the rotor either. All right, so we've got some coating on this one. All right, on the bottom one, okay, they're symmetric, so bottom and top are the same. And then do it again for this one too. A little bit of grease, little bit of grease, little bit of grease, little bit of grease. Okay, and just spread it around. Spread it around. Now let's take a look at the brake pads themselves. Okay, we're going to add a little bit on the ends here, okay, because those are going to be the contact points. Right here, right here as well, on this side here, okay, and then right here and right here, over here, over here, and over here. Okay, just like so. You see that? Again, don't touch the surface area, only right here on the this I guess you can call it a bracket of the pad. All right, and my bucket is fairly clean. I just wiped it before we did this, so not much should on this should affect the surface of the pad. Okay, so make sure you kind of get the surrounding area here. Okay, get some grease on it. All right, and finally we're gonna put some grease on the top of the shim. Okay, now the shim top is a little bit different, and you'll see in a second, but just put a little bit, okay? And the reason for that is, if you remember when we're looking at the caliper, only that forked portion of the caliper touches the outside here. All right, so we don't actually need to coat the whole thing, but we're gonna just do it anyway, and then we're gonna add a little bit of grease on the caliper itself. Okay, and over here on the inner brake pad, right, only that little circular piston actually hits the shim here. All right, so we actually don't need a coating everywhere on this shim, but to make things easier, we'll just coat this with some grease, okay, and then we're going to add some on that ring of the piston in just a second. Okay, coming back to the piston, you can see what I was saying here, where you see this outer forked area are what's going to make contact with the brake pad and shim. Okay, and this inner circular, the piston area, the surface area, is just a ring. Okay, so it's not going to make full contact over the entire shim. All right, so while we're here, let's just clean up the caliper a little bit. Okay, we got our wipes. Just do your best to clean out any kind of dirt or residue. Okay, and then on the inner side here as well, and also clean out the little contact areas right here. Okay, we're gonna put a little grease on them and then install both the shims and the pads, right? Shims and the pads. Just a little contact area right here. Okay, with your finger or with a Q-tip or something, very carefully add a little bit of caliper grease right here. Okay, the little sensitive areas. Okay, again, be very careful not to touch the rotor with the grease. Okay, it's not like the end of the world if you do. Okay, it will burn off as you drive the car, but it's just good to start off with it kind of greaseless. Okay, but add a little bit of the caliper grease on the inside, outside shim mounting point, and up here as well. Okay, just a little bit. All right, just a little bit, and try not to touch the rotor. Okay, if you want to use a screwdriver, any kind of fine tip tool instead, that is also acceptable. All right, also acceptable. Adding a little bit of the grease here, trying to get it on camera, but yeah, just on the little mounting points for the shim. Okay, just a little bit. Don't touch the rotor. Again, be very careful. Okay, also up here on the top one, and we'll be ready to install the shim. Okay, now that we have greased everything up, we can install the lower shim right here. Okay, so let's do that. And again, very carefully insert it and try not to hit the the rotor, right? So the clips on the shim allow it to just basically sit where it needs to sit. Okay, so that's that one. All right, and then doing the same for the upper shim. Okay, so here we go. Here's the upper shim. Install it in there. Okay, there's that one and there's that one. Okay, all right, so very carefully, because everything has been lubed up a certain way, install the pad. Okay, so this one's just gonna go in like so. Okay, put in the inner part of the pad first. Okay, and it'll just kind of slip inside. Alright, just slipping just like that. Okay, so we are now installed on the outer brake pad. Okay, just like so. And then of course do the exact same thing on the inner brake pad. Okay, so we're just gonna slip it in right here. Slip it in just like so. Okay, all right, so the brake pads are installed. Okay, now earlier I said something about this caliper piston here. Okay, so you'll see that the current position it's in is actually set for the amount of wear that removed the material and thickness from the existing pads. Okay, so now you'll find that if you try to put this down, it absolutely won't work. Okay, because that piston is now going to hit the side of the brake pad and not the back side of the brake pad or the top of the brake pad like it's supposed to. So what we'll need to do is compress this piston. All right, now the thing about that is you can't just compress the piston because there's fluid in the system right now. So what we'll need to do is open up the reservoir and make sure that as we compress the piston, that fluid will not back out to the top of the reservoir and cause a mess, right? So essentially what I'm saying is that when we compress the piston with the tool, what will happen is that fluid will push back up the system, okay, into the reservoir. And if the reservoir for the brake fluid is already full, it's going to spill all over. Okay, so to avoid a mess where the brake fluid starts spilling out of the reservoir, I recommend opening up the reservoir here, okay, and just kind of sticking a rag or paper towels or something and absorbing the excess brake fluid. Okay, you could do this with a rag, you can do it with a syringe. Okay, either way, okay, pull out some of the excess brake fluid, because as soon as we push out that piston, some of the fluid will back up through the reservoir. Okay, so the way the piston compressor works is, you see there's this plate here, right? Okay, and then there's this threaded bolt almost, right, that goes through the plate. And you can see here that on the other side there's this little circular disc of metal. Now what's supposed to happen is I'm supposed to put this brake caliper compressor in like so, okay? And then as I turn the bolt, right, this little prong at the end here is supposed to press down on the piston, okay? But however, in our case, our piston is hollow, okay? So we need to put something in between this little circular disc and the piston, okay? And what we can do is we can just use our old brake pad. All right, taking our old brake pad, we can use it as a little piece of metal here, or like a part of our extension here, okay? So as we turn this thing here now, it's going to compress the old brake pad against the piston and push it back. All right, so I've got this thing tightening now. Okay, you can see here as I turn the compression tool, okay, the piston is going to start going in. All right, so just keep doing this until the piston is all the way in, okay, because these are brand new brake pads, so we need to make sure that the piston is all the way reset to its original OEM position here. Okay, so just keep doing this. It is turning, okay, it is turning, it is pressing the system back to its original state, okay? And just keep doing this until the piston is in its backed out position. Okay, we can see here that this has kind of squirted out a little bit, but you get the idea, okay? And now that it's fully compressed, we can take the components out. Okay, and now before we press the caliper back into place, okay, we're gonna get our little caliper grease, all right, and just kind of coat the ring here, coat the piston with the caliper grease, get it all around. Okay, it probably won't hurt to do too much at this point. So just make sure you got sufficient coverage. All right. And of course, on the inside of the fork here, I just call it a fork because it looks like one, but yeah, just on the inside here, and those are the actual contact areas which will be pressed against the pad, right? So those are the contact areas we want to make sure there's grease on. Okay, and now that it is coated with the grease, we can bring our caliper down, okay, and over the brake pads, and it should fit over quite nicely, okay, without any issue. Okay, and there we go. You see, without any issue, slides right over the brake pads. Okay, so pay attention to the caliper pin down here. Okay, this caliper pin is actually some kind of a bushing which has clay in it. Okay, so it actually slides back and forth as the caliper is doing its job. All right, as you step on the brake. So we want to make sure that this bushing here is pressed in a little bit before we can fully slide the caliper back into place, like so. We want to bolt it back with the flange bolt. Okay, so stick the bolt back in there and screw it in by hand if possible. Now I said earlier that you're going to have to hold down the caliper pin as I screw this down, and that is still the case, okay? But do the best you can by hand first, all right? And you're gonna see that when we torque this down, we're going to have to hold the caliper pin. Okay, so now we are headed out to our favorite website, civic.hondafitjazz.com. Okay, so we can take a look at these diagrams here and get our bolt specs, okay, for the caliper holding bolt. Okay, so from the information here, you can see that there's actually two different types, two manufacturers which made the caliper for the Honda Civic. Okay, there's one which is Nissan and there's one which is Akebono. Okay, and the way you can tell is by the bolt size here. Okay, so if you take a look at the bolt size here, one is 10 by 1 millimeter, one is 8 by 1 millimeter, and that is actually the bolt diameter. Okay, so you can measure the bolt diameter and figure out which version you have. For the Nissan, right, you actually need to hold this pin while you torque down the bolt. Okay, in our case we have Akebono. Okay, and for the Akebono one, you do not need to hold the caliper pin with a wrench. Okay, and the way you can tell is if you look at the bolt diameter here, you can just match that to the bolt head size. Okay, if you remember, we had a 12 millimeter head. Okay, so that actually corresponds to 8 millimeter on the bolt diameter. Knowing which version of the caliper we have, we can now take a look at the torque spec. Okay, so if you take a look here, the torque spec for the Nissan was 37 pound-feet. Okay, and the torque spec for the Akebono was 25 pound-feet. Okay, so in our case, we don't need to hold this. I'm gonna use the wrench there, hold the wrench there just for illustration purposes, but all we need to do is torque this down to 25 foot-pounds. Okay, and again, depending on which caliper you have, okay, you may need to hold this in with a wrench like so, and then with your torque wrench you can go at it and torque it down to spec. Okay, so we're just gonna torque it down to spec. Okay, and that's it. Now you're officially done with one side, and you just need to do the other side, which is exactly the same as this side. Okay, after you've done both sides, don't forget to put the cap back on the brake fluid reservoir. Okay, so put that back on. All right, and that's it. Once you've done both the driver's and passenger side front brake pads, you're ready for a road test. Now, when you first install new brake pads, you may notice that the braking power is not as good as your old set, especially if you still have some material left on your old brake pad set. And that is because the brake pads need to be broken in, okay? So if you remember looking at the old and the new brake pads, the old brake pads had actually a very smooth surface on them, while the brand new brake pads actually still had that rough surface on them. So it's going to take some driving to get those brake pads broken in so that the mating surface is as good as it can be against the rotors, okay? So you're going to have to drive around for at least several hundred miles, and I would say by 500 miles your brake pads are officially broken in. Okay, so if you found this video helpful, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you would like to support this channel, please use the affiliate links below, and I'll see you next time on Kelvin's Garage.